Our special guest on Florida Newsmakers this week, Secretary of State Ken Detzner. Thanks for being here, sir.
Thank you, Ron.
Well, the 2013 session of the legislature has a few issues everybody knows are going to come out of there, and one of them is election reform. 2012, Florida was in the national headlines again for delays. What's going to happen in this reform?
Well, first of all, let me say we had a good election and a fair election in 2012, but I anticipate the legislature is going to address these problems. We made some recommendations to them at the direction of the governor, one dealing with long lines, more availability of locations, more time to vote. In fact, if the legislature passes my recommendations, we'll have more voting time than ever in the history of Florida, up to 168 hours of early voting.
But these reforms they're looking at in 13 are reforms of reforms that were made in 2011. What were the mistakes made in 2011?
Well, I don't really think there were any mistakes made. These are improvements on a platform that was built in 2011, and they're enhancements. They're adding more names and more locations for early voting and adding additional time. So it's an enhancement, I think, of 2011's legislation.
Now, you're nonpartisan in this job, but Democrats have widely criticized that it was Republicans who put in reforms that curtailed access to voting spaces and times. Is that so?
Well, I think we recognize that as voters change and their behavior change, the law needs to change. I think Democrats have done a good job pointing out some of the improvements we can make. We're addressing that. The Republican legislature is addressing it. Democrats voted almost unanimously in the House for the reforms that were put in place and moving through the legislature now. So I think you're going to see bipartisan support when it's all said and done.
Well, you interviewed lots of supervisors of elections, and there are so many ballot issues that are lengthy in their language and confusing. What's being done about that?
One of the recommendations was to limit the number of the language or the words that can be used on ballots. We had 11 constitutional amendments, up to 2,500 words. We would recommend the legislature adopt a proposal 75 words, no more, on any single constitutional amendment.
What are the overarching principles that should be the centerpiece in any election reform under you as Secretary of State?
Well, the number one is that everyone that is eligible to vote votes, and that every vote is counted.
Okay. Is there a partisan flavor to what's working its way through the legislature this year, though, on the reforms?
I think the debate has been partisan to some degree, but the Democrats and Republicans I talk to know that they need to provide an additional level of support for the consumers, our voters, and make sure we do it right. They are accountable, I am accountable to voters to make sure we get this voting process correct.
Well, on the good news front, voters were motivated to turn out. What kind of turnout did we have then in 12?
We had a record turnout of the number of voters. We were a little lower than the last presidential in terms of percent, but the number of voters that voted this year was unprecedented in terms of turnout, record number.
Well, for your job, Secretary of State, 2013 is a historic year because Florida celebrates 500 years of history. What is Viva Florida 500?
We are celebrating the 500-year anniversary of when Ponce de Leon, a Spanish explorer, landed on the east coast of Florida.
And that began our history.
That began our history. 500 years that claim that no other state can make.
Well, 19 million Floridians here, but a good percentage of them come from someplace else. So how will you get them enthused about learning about Florida's rich 500-year history?
Well, it's a grassroots effort. It's libraries, it's communities, it's law firms and businesses that have engaged in celebrating, commemorating this, including some conversation we're having with the Native Americans. We should never forget that the Native Americans were here before we were. So it's local governments, it's people at the grassroots level in neighborhoods that are creating events on their own to commemorate this important event.
The website Floridians can go to for information of what's happening in their neighborhoods?
VivaFlorida.org, and everybody should go and visit it. It's very popular, lots of activities. You can find out what's going on in your own community by our schedule, and it keeps you updated on things that are going on around the state.
Well, Secretary Ken Detzner, thank you very much for joining us on Florida Newsmakers, and we'll see you next time.